Welcome to Creative Courage Chats, a search for a new understanding of creativity and problem solving. I'm Alex Raffi. Great. So, hi everybody. We're back to do another Creative Courage Chat. I'm actually doing this from Oregon now. We're over in Cannon Beach, and I'm on a little getaway to help chill out a little bit and relax because things have been pretty tense lately. And I am lucky here. I get to speak to my good friend Myisha Williams. She's president and managing member of MYS Project Management. We've had lots and lots of lunches and talks and chats about things. She's brilliant, in my opinion, and she doesn't normally do these kinds of things, so I'm special. She's a great, just so anybody knows, don't think she's easy to get on one of these. So, I'm just saying. But anyway, I'm throwing that out. One thing I did want to say before I throw it over to you to do a little intro is on your LinkedIn, your about is interesting to me, and it's super relevant. So I'm going to read it out loud here. It says, your about says, creative problem solver with more than a decade of applied leadership and project experience, skilled at transforming technical content into streamlined messaging, adept at business development through authentic relationship building and retention, passion for initiatives focused on inclusion and diversity with the goal of generational results, loyalist to the art of true customer service. That is fantastic. And I love that about. And it so fits into what I'm trying to talk about on this thing. Super relevant. But anyway, I'm going to throw it over to you and say, because that's part, I'm going to tap into that a little bit later, but I'm going to throw it over to you. Give a little bit of an intro, tell people about who you are.
Sure. So I'm a small business owner here in the Las Vegas community, and been working really hard at that for the last almost 6 years now. Understand what that struggle is like and do my best to try and help our business as well as others like us to succeed in this market. So take some doing.
It sure does. And one of the things we're talking about here is the value of diversity in creative problem solving is one of the things I wanted to kind of tap into. And you brought that up when we talked about doing this. And I think that's an interesting topic. Mm-hmm. When you wanted to tap into that, what was it you were referring to when you talk about, what do you mean when you talk about dealing with diversity in creative problem solving?
Yeah, so I guess, Alex, diversity just is a term that's so broad. So I guess we touch it in a lot of different ways. In my volunteer work as a commissioner for the state of Nevada with a Commission on Minority Affairs, we're talking about huge, large-scale issues. So we cover, housing and workforce and police relations, and we're covering the gamut of very large topics. Bringing it down then to like what our organization focuses on, from a project perspective, we're often working on bringing in diverse businesses to opportunities here in the Valley. So we're working with some of the larger private entities in the city to help locate diverse businesses that are ready and willing and able to work, bringing those in and providing opportunity. Now, on the creative side of things, we have a full graphic and visual communication team. So our visual communication team actually focuses on inclusionary imagery. So I feel like it is a huge effort when you talk about really living the meaning behind diversity and inclusion. I don't think it's limited to one singular effort. So we take all of them, from the very broad stuff that we know why it's needed, down to providing economic opportunities to folks in the Valley, and then to the very micro level of what you see every day in advertising, or what you see on the next flyer coming out from one of our state offices reflects that same ideal. So I think it's something that's really important to us, and we pay a lot of attention to.
Well, the idea of diversity and inclusion and stuff, it's not just a nice thing. It's actually important. And I think that that's kind of something that seems like it's obvious to some of us, but I think that it isn't as obvious to others. But that the fact that having a diverse workforce or a diversity within your project, it creates more opportunity because there's more different perspectives, right? And is that what we're talking
Absolutely.
about? Is kind of, because you've always seemed to me, and I know you're not a fan of this kind of stuff, but
Oh, goodness.
yeah. So, but you've always seemed to me as somebody who is pretty fearless about the things you believe in and jump into things, and even your MYS project management. I mean, the goal of your entire business is to really dive into things with confidence, because it seems to me that the things that you normally work on are intimidating to a lot of people because you have to dive into, sometimes you have to dive into situations that you're not an expert in, but the skill set that you're an expert in is universal. It's managing projects.
Thank you.
So which I oh, you said thank you. So I'm on the mark on that. That's good. Sometimes I'm wrong about
No, I appreciate it.
No.
Well, no, it's funny because our subject matter expertise is project management, which is
Right.
often just a coordination of subject matter experts. So a lot of times people aren't bringing us in to hear our opinion. They're bringing us in to help facilitate conversation and realize outcomes. So you can take subject matter expertise from a lot of different areas, and I think it's knowing where those limitations are, which can make somebody a good project manager. Is, hey, you may have some experience here, but the role here is to help facilitate the people in the room or to try and get to this common goal. And so that's what we are often doing. And I think that's kind of how the diversity work started, and then it funneled into a subject matter expertise. So at this point, I feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable speaking on topics and leading conversations, being a thought leader in terms of here's solutions to increase diversity in workforce or increase diversity in economic opportunity. That's a much more comfortable conversation. So,
Yeah, and it's just, we talk about creativity, but I've always reproached creativity as also as problem solving. As you know, we've had this discussion where there's no difference as far as I'm concerned. Even though I do delve in the art side of things, I do believe that creativity has to do with literally anything. I mean, I see you as an incredibly creative person, obviously, and the way that you approach things. I don't know if you can draw, but
no.
but regardless, it doesn't matter because it's about problem solving. But we also talk about that the idea of having a good idea isn't enough. Is having a passion for something isn't enough. I mean, it's a good start, obviously. I mean, it's what you need. It's how things get started, but it's just a spark, right? I think that the execution is kind of like the oxygen that blows on the fire, right? That makes it actually come to be something. A good idea, a great idea, poorly executed is not a great idea at the end, right? In the end of the day, it kind of loses everything.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what you just mentioned a minute ago, is that diversity of thought. So when you stop talking about diversity just in terms of different backgrounds or skin colors, and you just talk about different experiences.
Right.
Especially in the creative process, I feel like the more views you can get as part of that process, the more phenomenal an outcome or product you end up with, because you start to look at it from all these different views, right? So artists are usually really skilled at taking different views and being able to insert them into a single piece. Not everybody can do that. So in the times when you can't, or when you didn't think about it, it's really great to have multiple opinions, multiple experiences weighing in on that, because I think in the end, you end up with a much stronger something, right? So your widget is this much better because a lot of people thought about it. It can impact people in different ways.
I think that, I'm not sure how you did it, but I think you did tap into a big need, is that a lot of people are not good at managing the things that they love or they're involved in or they're trying to do. And I think that that's why it's always kind of been interesting. And like your strengths are kind of my weaknesses, I'm a great idea starter. I'm the person in the room throws out this concept and an idea, and then people smarter than me go, hey, there you go. Let's see if we can make this work. And so
you can't fool me, Alex. You're pretty smart.
Right. Well, yeah, sure. But I like the role of being the dumb guy in the room with a good idea. But anyway, so one of the things also is you have I imagine over the years you've definitely created and developed particular methods and of how to approach things. Because a lot of the projects that you approach and you're dealing with are kind of complex, and they're things that
Yeah.
take some time. So how do you go when you approach a complicated? Maybe I don't know if you have an example or something. How do you approach those things? Because I know you have a great team. I know you have a fantastic team behind you that helps out with this, and I'm
Right.
sure it has to do with some delegation there. But how do you approach it?
Sure. So it's really funny because within the field of project management, there's all these different techniques you can use, right? You go to school, you can become certified, you can learn all this stuff. But ultimately, what I've always said it comes down to is just common sense. So when you're working with some really difficult stuff, it's a lot of times working from where you want to go backward, and then working with the personalities and the limitations and the strengths that are in the room. So really, I feel like it's more of a taking the whole picture and saying, okay, these are where there's going to be some issues. Here's where we're going to be really strong. Here's the timeline. And you just start to realistically look at that and work backward. So yeah, as you point to, having a good team of people that understand, like you don't have to follow just the chart to get something done.
Mm-hmm.
That you can look at things from kind of the fuller perspective and make some common sense calls, like, hey, this is really confusing. Let me pick up the phone and talk to someone about it, you know, instead of creating 4 more spreadsheets.
But not being afraid on how that's perceived is important, because a lot of people don't want to make that call because it'll seem like I don't know what I'm talking about. They're going to figure out that you don't know what you're talking about if you don't make the call.
And that's the thing, is I feel like, you know what, we're all human. So there are a lot of tools and a lot of processes you can do and kind of show off and show your thought process and your thinking, but a lot of times picking up the phone and walking through things. So a lot of times we'll have like an issue in a project, and it could be somebody's having a really rough day and they've had a whole bunch of stuff placed on them, and it's going to impact a lot of things. And sometimes a conversation can help move that along. So I think it's really just being tied into people. And one of the things that was intentional about that write-up on LinkedIn is the authenticity part, is that when you deal with people authentically, I feel like you can move mountains. And that doesn't mean that you have to like everyone. It doesn't mean you have to do it their way, but you find the things that you can authentically engage on, and those are the things that you utilize to move things. So I feel like everybody that I connect with, it's an authentic connection. And you just choose to focus on the things that move progress forward. That goes a long way, because I feel like people can see through the other stuff. Like, you know, at some point you realize somebody's kind of just there because they have to be. So if you can find ways people are so similar. Even with so many backgrounds, there's always something similar. And those are really important to getting the work done. So that's my thought, at least.
Contrary to some popular
None of this is very technical or trained, is it?
Well, no, it actually is. It's learned, right? It's learned. We figured this out through errors.
It works. It's worked.
Right, and it's mistakes and thinking, you know what? I need to just trust these people that I've brought in and I've actually hired and put in. You know, we got to trust them and trust their judgment. And then if things go south, then it's a learning experience. I mean, just like anything else, you know.
Absolutely.
And nothing happens without people. Nothing happens. You can't do things on your own. You know what I mean? We're all involved.
As much as we try, yeah.
I mean,
absolutely true.
Yeah, nothing happens without people. Nothing. Even the ones that are a pain in the butt are relevant sometimes, right? Even the ones pushing back on you and tripping you and setting up traps. You know, makes us more nimble. It's very important. I know it's a hard lesson to learn, and you know, we're, you know, understand. I mean, just everybody knows this, that we're going through some difficult times right now, and we don't have to go into it. We all know what's going on, but I think that this stuff that we talk about right now, that we're talking about, is relevant. I think because there's a lot of problems, and the approach that we have towards fixing these problems is incredibly relevant, and I think we need to sometimes approach these just like you would any other problem. Try to take the emotion out of it sometimes, and then really kind of let's see, what are we talking about here? Because at the end of the day, I kind of feel like all of us want, you know, a better world for our kids. I'm assuming this, that everybody wants lower taxes. Everybody wants to be successful in whatever they're doing. They want their families safe and happy. They want opportunities for their kids. I mean, we're all wanting the same thing. We just need to figure out what's the best path. But anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll get off of that right now. But
no, absolutely. So Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No.
I was just going to add on to it
Yes.
in that we've been getting a lot of inquiries about how to, given the time that we're in and all the topics on the table, and especially some of the uncomfortable ones, how to even begin to address them. And it's funny because it's come in even through our design requests, so our websites. Like, how do we become anti-racist on our new site? How do we create a more inclusive, imagery? And I really feel like folks should not be scared to ask the questions that a lot of people are uncomfortable in the past asking. I think this is a very key time to where those conversations are opening up and that folks shouldn't be afraid to engage. So, I mean, a lot of the things that you mentioned, like we all have a lot of similarities, and I think I alluded to that when working with different teams and different types of people, but there's always these cross points where we can identify, and I think right now is an especially important time to open up the conversation. And I think that the design world has a special responsibility in helping to shape what we're seeing and what we're looking at, what our art reflects and what the times reflect. And I was excited to have this conversation during this time because my topic's always been diversity
Right.
for the most part. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And now that we're getting this incoming barrage of requests in regards to diversity and what that looks like and what that means, I'm excited to be here to encourage people to continue that conversation. I see it as a really positive move.
Well, let's do that then. Well, since you opened up that door here for me. So
Okay.
I think that one of the things I'm learning is that is to admit that I also have unintended prejudices, right? And that I'm facing things that, because it's easy to say, oh, I'm not prejudiced in any way. But there are certain things that were learned that were early on, especially in school. And in one of the main areas was the statues issue. And I know I've probably brought this up before, but that's what the problem is that I can only hold 7 things in my head at a time, so I tend to repeat myself sometimes. but that's the thing, is that in school there are certain things that we were taught that weren't accurate. They just simply were not accurate about the history of the country, and that we're facing some of those instilled prejudices from history books that we're just glossing over atrocities that have happened in history. And there's, I'm being a little vague because I just really don't want to go into too much of it, but it was, a lot of it has to do with, that is relevant to why people are upset about certain statues. And there is a reason, and there is a solid and legitimate reason. And at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, what's more important here? Is this kind of, I know people believe that certain things it's like a heritage thing, but what are we proud of here? What are we saying that we're proud of? And there were certain parts of me that were like, well, why tear it down? Why not just put a new plaque on it that educates people as to why this is a terrible thing? And I've changed my opinion on that because of things I've been learning as we go forward. And I think that there's plenty of places other than this statue that holds this person on a pedestal that is human garbage, that we're putting this person on a pedestal. We don't have to teach them at that point. It's best to maybe wipe that particular thing clean and change the history books and change the stories that are in the history books and educate through those ways. At the very most important part when you're kids is educate them when they're young so that they don't come up with bad information. And there's a lot of it. And I think that this is my call out to a lot of people. If you're really positive that you're right about something, you're probably not. There has to be some doubt, and there has to be the world is a big place, and you take up this much of it. There's a lot to learn here. But if your world is this big and you know this much, you think that there isn't much to learn here. And you start, you live in these little tiny bubbles and you think that you're smarter than you actually are. And I think that's an important way of looking at certain things. But anyway, I'm talking too much, just about you.
No, this is a conversation. And for me, I think any time folks are not willing to converse, that worries me. So I feel like everybody's going to be at a different stage based on where their influences are, what types of conversations they're having. And so I'd say even for folks that aren't that far advanced, I think that it's still important to open up the conversation.
Right.
But what's interesting is we're talking about this from a creativity platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I would challenge the other creative people in this industry to really take that secondary look at what we're putting out there.
Yes.
I think that on our team, we always joke that they're the secondary search term team. And what that means is whenever we search for, say, a stock image for a new campaign, instead of just woman on the beach, we'll put heavy set woman on the beach. It's always a secondary term to start to normalize the imagery that we see. And I think that we as creative people can start to shift the conversation through pure visual. And sometimes it's not just a verbal argument or a verbal altercation or a 2-hour rationale that needs to occur. I actually think that if creative people took the initiative to start being more intentional about diversity in design, the conversation would shift on its own. So I feel like we can set the tone for what's normal.
Yeah.
And so from a creative standpoint, and it's funny because through all of this that's been happening, I know a lot of people that feel like they're not doing enough. So people that champion diversity for all time are like, well, I'm working on this, I'm working on that, but I don't have time to march. Or, I've been marching, but I don't have time to go write the letter to the legislative person, right? And I think it's important, and what I've been told, which I think is solid advice, is stay in your lane. There's work to be done in every lane that you're in. If your lane is creative, I think there are absolute ways to join the conversation without putting yourself way out of your comfort zone, way out of your knowledge base. Stay within your creative lane and make extra efforts to add a secondary search term.
Okay, that's my rewind moment. I don't know if you know I'm doing these rewind moments in my talks. That's it. So if you're a creative and you're a designer and you're wanting to see what is a really important part of this conversation, I think you read and listen to what she just said just there. I think that's really interesting. There's two aspects to what you said that are important. Aside obviously from the big picture of what you're doing by making your artwork more diverse, and it's part of a movement and it's part of what we're trying to make things better and guide us in a certain direction. That's good. But also from a practical marketing standpoint, it's a good interruption. Because people aren't used to seeing heavy-set women in advertisements or whatever you're doing. And then as soon as they see it, it interrupts them, which is what you want with your graphics. You want to put something in.
It does. And that's who you see. When you go to the beach, they're not all models and they're not all the same.
No.
And I feel like diversity gets so bent set on race and color that I'm like, no, when we talk about diverse design, we're talking about designing with people with disabilities. We're talking about designing with heavier set men and women, just because you don't see it most of the time in advertising, and that has a profound effect on how people feel and think about other people. You can have long conversations with people, and it may not have the same impact as a 60-second commercial. And I feel like we have a duty while the conversation's going now and while it's top of mind to make that effort, because I don't think it's hard. I think it's invisible.
Yes.
We used to, in a past life, I used to oversee marketing campaigns for a large agency. And I was constantly sending back designs to our contractor and saying, I would like to see more color. I would like to see different shaped people. I would like to, and so it was no way intentional. I didn't feel like they were fighting me and saying, here you go. And it's funny, when we created our visual communication team, we realized how hard it was to find those images, because now we're being intentional and they're not available. So we had to add a secondary term, because if you search just the regular, you're designing. It's not intentional. You need to get it done. So you put in, let's say, a professional woman, right? You need an ad for a professional woman. You're making a billboard, right? And you're going to stock photography. Your options are already selected for you, and there is no diversity in them.
Right.
If you want a disabled person with disabilities, right? You have to actually add that to your professional woman description. That's a lot for a designer. And unless you're specifically designing that way, which our company has practiced doing, I really don't think people do it on purpose.
Yeah.
But when you stop seeing yourself represented in media, has a profound effect, especially on children. And so I feel like, oh my gosh, this is an awesome time to talk to Alex and tell him, hey, design community, let's do secondary search terms until they become normal. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be progress?
When you know, and no offense to Getty Images, but when you do searches on Getty Images, you are right. It's limited. It's usually it's the pretty white lady, the blonde white lady that appears, and then there's the handsome white guy, and then you have the handsome and pretty African American person, or if you put Asian, it's kind of, but if you put handicapped, usually it has to do with being handicapped. Like people are trying to do a handicapped-y thing.
Right.
It's not like a handicapped person
it's not just
cooking.
Yeah, like professional woman might, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly it, it becomes so specific. But here's the thing, the more those types of images are used, the higher the demand and the more we shift what's available. So this is why I really feel like this is a great time to make some changes, and it just starts with becoming intentional. I really don't feel like people intentionally put out design that only reflects certain groups of people. I just think we're all so used to it. Don't even think about it. It's just what's natural.
You mean there's no intent really? It's just something
that's
just we're used to doing.
No, I really don't.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Having worked all these projects in diversity, I've run across all kinds of people, and a lot of it's just like, hey, do you ever think about this? And I'd be like, gosh, no, that's crazy. And then once the awareness is drawn, you can shift the thought process. But most of it is invisible. And I think that is inclusive to even some of the earlier conversation with statues. Like, it's invisible. I don't think people are, and maybe sometimes they did purposefully put it up there for that specific reason. But I think that the general population is pretty good and considers themselves fair. And I believe that. Right. I think a lot of this is very unintentional. So what this time period has done is started to force a conversation about what's hidden. And I think we have a great opportunity to bring some of those things to light. So I feel much less frustrated or angry. I feel more like, sweet, it's the conversation. Let's talk, because what do you think about doing this? And it's funny because when people engage us for design work, they don't always engage us because our designer has a degree in social justice. They don't even know that. But our designer will put in inclusive imagery to people's stuff all the time. They never send it back and say, why did you put that heavyset person on there?
Right.
They're like, great. So it's not like people are fighting diversity and inclusion. I don't feel it's active. I feel it's very passive. But if we as designers take the initiative and people don't push back on it, imagine what our kids will see in a couple of years.
Right. Yeah.
Can you imagine if we change the face of advertising? Like, how cool would that be?
See,
so anyway,
you're thinking big, though. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be going at things with those big expectations, because that's when things happen. It only happens when you're not humble and not all shy about things. You have to have the courage to put yourself out there, the courage to be creative. Where did I hear that before?
Well, I'd like to challenge others to do the same, Alex, and I appreciate this platform to be able to talk about it.
I love it. I think that's fantastic, and I think that's an important thing that we need to go for. It's funny because I kept getting a little story in my head about Burke Breed is I used to want to be I was a cartoonist for a short time, but one of my favorite cartoonists is Burke Breed, and hopefully one day I'll interview him for this thing. That's kind of my personal goal too. Cool. But he had a comic strip, and in it he had a character who was in a wheelchair. And he was a veteran, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was at a show or he was at something, and a veteran came up in a wheelchair and said, you know what, I want to thank you, because your comic strip is the only comic strip I've ever seen that showed a person in a wheelchair. And he goes, yeah. He said, it's really convenient, because all of my characters are really short, and him being in a wheelchair, I can have them both at the same height, where they're able to communicate, and the bubbles still fit above there. And because it's so difficult to try to fit normal heighted people in a situation with a shorter. And the guy goes, yeah, you think that's difficult? You should try riding around in this like your entire life for the rest of your life. And it kind of, because it was like he was so clueless on the situation. Like, it was an interesting, I thought it was just an interesting thing to kind of consider.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes we do it out of practicality, and other times we can just do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
So.
And I think that's the thing that's the thing that is interesting, is that, like I said, is that you can do it, but even if you're not doing it for the reasons, the initial reasons, like I said, it's still an interruption, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
So, when you're see, passion for initiatives focused on inclusion and diversity with the goal of generational results. That's such a good sentence. You're such a good writer. Did you write this? Because this is I love this. With the goal of generational results. When you say that,
right.
I'm thinking you're trying to plant a seed with the work you're doing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's systemic barriers that have held people back for long periods of time. And sometimes just throwing money at situations doesn't solve the problem. When you are creating generational wealth, what you're doing is ending a pattern of oppression. And so the programs and the projects and the work that I just love, that fuels me to do what I do, are the ones that have long-lasting results. So, I mean, it's great to see somebody get a small contract here or there. But what we're hoping to do, and what we try and measure through especially our diversity programming, is the longer-term results. Are you hiring more people? Are you getting more equipment? Are you increasing, say, your bonding limits? Can you now qualify for capital that wasn't available to you before? Things that change the trajectory of the business. So not just, hey, here's your certificate, you won something, but does this impact you for the long term? Does this set you up for the next win? Because otherwise it's just temporary. And it's great to be able to eat today, but I'd like to eat forever, right? And so I think that it's important to build new systems and implement new rules and try new tactics that allow people to be able to replicate success over time. And I think that with that, we'll see an improvement in a lot of the systems that have trouble now, because people are dependent on those systems because it's been built that way. If you can change how the system works and the dependencies on it, it changes a lot of things. And I mean, with Nevada now being a majority minority state, we have 33% Hispanic representation. We need to make sure that people of color have opportunity and are able to take care of themselves. So the longer we restrict people from opportunity, the more we're going to pay for it as we grow, because we're just becoming more diverse. So we really need to shift the thinking and the programming and the opportunities to be more inclusive. So I would say yes. To your point, short-term wins are just that. And those aren't as exciting as some of the programming that we've been able to work on that makes sure that way after an initial opportunity, that there's still opportunity for additional growth.
Right. And we can't do anything without each other and without people. And even in, my favorite sport is soccer. And whenever I coach soccer and I coach kids in soccer, I'd say, I know everybody wants to make a goal, but what's important is to win the ball. If each of us tries to win the ball together and we pass it and move forward and each win the ball, each ball is a win. And the more little wins we get, we'll eventually hit a goal, at the end. And I think that's really important to consider. I think there's a lot of, that's another area that I think is important too, is that my bigger goal also for this is because for me, the biggest priority in the world is our kids. And there's nothing more valuable than youth and kids. And my hope is that a young person is going to listen to you here in this conversation, be inspired, and have the courage to go ahead and take some chances. As you did when you were young, you for whatever reason, anyone that's successful and doing good work, at some point had to find the courage to think, you know what, my opinion is valuable and I need to go ahead and do the thing. So assuming that that person, whoever that young person is watching, what would you say to them? Because the world's really scary right now for a lot of people. And so what would you say to them?
So can I steal a quote from a graduation card that I thought was awesome?
Yeah.
It basically said, follow your passion, the opportunity will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I wholeheartedly believe that, and that's exactly what's happened to me. So I have technical training in project management outside of the areas of my passion. And those help to sustain, you know, my lifestyle and make sure that there's security for my daughter and things of that sort. I absolutely had to do those things. Having a skill set, having a trade, having, you know, something that brings in security is absolutely important. But I've always made time for my passion. And what happened at some point, those two just intersected. And it happened without me forcing it. So separately, you know, I think we have to be realistic. Oh, just living your passion all the time and hoping that it pays you is a little bit stressful, and sometimes it can ruin that passion a little bit because there's so much pressure to succeed in it. But I do feel that if you stay the course and you stay honest with yourself and follow the things that really matter to you, it's going to intersect at some point. So whether you go full force or whether you go 50%, if you love it, it's going to find you. And that's what happened for me. I'm doing project management in IT. I mean, I have an IT background running big systems. I started doing my diversity work, and then the questions started coming, could you manage a project in relation to diversity? I'm like, absolutely. You know, and the question came to me because the passion was evident. And so people will get attracted to that. People can feel energy, and people understand when it's coming from a good place and you're really looking for solutions. And I think that now with that intersection, life is so much more fulfilling for me because the work that I get paid to do is the work that I truly love. So I would say anybody watching this, make time for your passion. And even if it doesn't quite make sense with what you might be going at the moment, don't abandon it because they will intersect in the strangest way possible.
That's fantastic. I'm not going to add anything there. That is perfect. But anyway, so I feel like, see, you know, it's funny because when you first talked, you were like, I hope I have enough to fill, you know, all the time, 45 minutes, and we're pretty much there.
Yeah,
so,
we're right there.
And I think we could keep going, but I'm going to spare you and tell you thank you for making the time. Thank you for making the time for me, and I really appreciate it. And you know, you're one of those people that I really like a lot, and I like to speak to because you've found a way to take intense critical thinking and a giant heart and figured out how to put them together and do some good work. And I think that's fantastic.
Working on it.
Yeah, no, you're doing a good job. You're doing a really good job. So hopefully you and I will have more.
Thank you for this platform.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. Thank you for adding to it. I mean, I have a big goal here, and you're a very valuable part of the bigger goal there. So I'm gonna bother you again and see if I can convince you to do this for me again another day on maybe another topic.
Whatever you need, Alex, I'm here. I absolutely believe. Oh gosh, once you set your mind to something, hey, this is just right into the passion conversation we just had. I have no doubt, and it's so exciting to see it continue to blossom. So any support I can offer, keep it up. This is great, and really appreciate the next opportunity. Yeah.
Well, okay. The one thing I will say, if the kid is still around, that's listening. It's not enough to. It is not enough to have just passion, because a lot of people have passion. It's what are you going to do with the passion? What are you going to do? How are you going to make your passion work? And I think that's something that is important to consider. And I think that if you rewind and listen to this, you'll figure out a path there. Anyway, thanks a lot, and I really appreciate the time again. All right.
All right. Bye. Wonderful. Talk to you soon. Bye.